In our ongoing study of time, we've reached the point where now we can start to talk about specifically simple time and compound time. We have understood what it means to have a beat, what it means to designate a note value to a beat, and what it means to organize our time into measures, or to organize those beats into measures. What we now need to know is, through the use of a time signature, how do we tell the performer how many beats and what type of beat will be in each measure? Well, we're going to look first of all at simple time. And quite frankly, some of what I'm going to say you just kind of have to accept. It's not so much that I can necessarily explain it as I simply tell you what the symbols mean. So the first thing you need to know is that in simple time the top number will be 2, 3, or 4. Those are the only numbers in simple time that can go on the top of the time signature. Now, remember, the bottom number of a time signature is always a designation of note value. Right? You cannot have a number on the bottom that does not connect or relate to a note value. And those note values, as we looked at in the last video, are designated by number to relate to a particular note value. So a 1 equals a whole note, a 2 equals a half note, a 4 equals a quarter note. So simple time signatures are going to be a combination of 2, 3, or 4 on the top and a designation for a note value on the bottom. So I've put some up here. 2, 4 time. 2 on the top tells you it's simple time. 4 on the bottom tells you that we're dealing with quarter notes in the measure. Now, what do we mean by simple time? Well, simple time means that the beat is able to be divided into two equal parts. And we see that here. If we look at this first measure here, if this is a measure of 2, 4 time, then what we're saying is we read the time signature. We have 2 quarter notes in the measure. There are the 2 quarter notes. Those quarter notes, hopefully mathematically, we can kind of see that those 2 quarter notes could easily be divided into 2 eighth notes. Each quarter note is equivalent to 2 eighth notes. Now, we can write in that measure any note values we want that add up to 2 quarter notes. We have to make sure that our note values ultimately add up to 2 quarter notes, no more, no less. What this is telling us, however, about the time is much more than just how many note values to make everything add up to in the measure. It's telling us that we have 2 simple beats in the measure. And that's important. It's telling us that within each measure we have 2 beats. Now a new measure. 1, 2, 1, 2. And it's telling us that those beats are simple beats, which means that behind the beat we have an equal division into 2 parts. Ta, 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 ta. And each time 2 beats goes past, we have a division feeling of each of those beats being divided evenly into 2 parts, and then a new measure starts. There are 2 beats to each measure. And it's telling us all of that information in the time signature. The 2 on the top tells us it's simple time, which means the division of the beat is into 2 equal parts. The 4 on the bottom tells us what type of note to use for the beat. And then we can figure out the division of the beat underneath that. Let's look at a couple of others just to make sure we've got the concept. This time we have a 4 on the top. The 4 tells us it's simple time. It's one of the 3 types of number, the 3 numbers that can occur on the top of a time signature in simple time. There are only 2, 3, or 4. So the 4 tells us it's simple time. The 8 underneath tells us that in each measure we have 4 eighth notes. The 8 on the bottom tells us that we are dealing with eighth notes within the measure. So we have 4 eighth notes within the measure. Now, because it's simple time, we can observe, we can also note to ourselves that each of those notes can be divided into 2 equal parts. And that's just, it's what's going on in the background. So every measure will have the equivalent of 4/8 notes, but every measure will also have not just a feeling of 4/8 notes going by, but a background division of the beat feeling of a further division of each beat into 2 equal parts. And the same then will be true of this next one. Here we have 3/2 time. Again, the 3 on the top tells us it's simple time. It's 2, 3, or 4. It's got to be simple time. There are going to be some other numbers we're going to look at which are going to tell us it's compound time. We'll look at those in the next video. But 2, 3, or 4 tells us it's simple time. Simple time means that we have a beat and then we have a feeling behind the beat of a division into 2 equal parts. So we have a beat, 3 beats in the measure. That's what the 3 is telling us. But it is also telling us that those beats are going to be into half notes. And so we have 3 half notes in the measure, or the equivalent of 3 half notes in the measure. But what we observe to ourselves is that indeed we have 2 quarter notes, in a sense, lying behind the beat. That is to say that each beat, which is a half note long, has a feeling of dividing into 2 equal parts behind it. So any note value can be assigned to occur in a measure a certain number of times. And if indeed you have a 2, 3, or 4 on the top, that is telling you quite a bit of information. It's telling you it's simple time. It's telling you, quite frankly at this point, it is telling you how many beats you have in the measure, 2 beats, 3 beats, or 4 beats. And it is telling you that because it's simple time, that those beats are going to have a background feeling that they divide into 2 equal parts. And that's all that information is in the top number. The only other piece of information you then need is the bottom number, which is a note value. And that just tells you how many, you know you're going to have 2, it just tells you what type of note to have that many of. You're going to have 2 quarter notes, or 2 eighth notes, or 2 16th notes, or whatever that bottom number is. The bottom number relates to a type of note value. The top number tells you how many of those notes to have in each measure. And in the case of simple time, that top number also tells you the number of beats. Now that is different when we get to compound time. The top number tells you a certain amount of information, but it doesn't quite tell you exactly the same amount of information. So that's where it's got to be kept. You've got to keep the 2 things separate in your mind. So for today, the concept I want you to have, that we can have time signatures, that the bottom number of the time signature is always telling you a note value. The top number of the time signature tells you something different depending on if it's simple or compound time. And in simple time, it is a 2, 3, or 4, and it is telling you that you have 2, 3, or 4 beats in the measure, and that those beats are whatever the note value is that's underneath them. That's what it's telling you. And because it's simple time, those numbers are also telling you, the time signature is also telling you, that behind each of the beats, you will feel a sense of a division into 2 equal parts. Each beat will divide into 2 equal parts. If you think you understand that much, you think you've got your mind around that much information for simple time, that's great. Now go on to the next video on compound time. And then I would recommend that you may want to come back and watch this one again and the compound one again, so that you kind of get a sense of how the 2 are similar and how they're different. And I may even add a 3rd video trying to compare the 2, so you get a sense of how the 2 work in a similar fashion, and yet how they are distinct from one another. So, simple time, get that concept in your mind, and then move on to the next video for compound time. Thank you.